This is Capitol View.
And good Sunday morning to you. Welcome into Capitol View. I am Jay Bir. A crowded field of almost 30 Democratic presidential candidates cut down to just two after Super Tuesday. Former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders. Right now, Biden has 627 delegates. Sanders not far behind with 551. This now mano-a-mano matchup picks up in advance of the next contest, which will be March 10th. And those will have contests in Idaho, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, and Washington State. And joining us now to break down some of the Super Tuesday action and the primary days coming up is our very own Jessie Turnure in our D.C. Bureau. Jessie, how are you doing?
Oh, just great. How are you, Jay?
Oh, I'm wonderful now that you're here. Let's get to it here. Kind of the reaction nationally in terms of Super Tuesday. I think things probably kind of went the way we all sort of thought they were going to be. Bloomberg maybe not having near as much an impact as maybe some people maybe would have thought, but here we are, the cream rising to the top. It's now Biden and Bernie.
Right. I mean, looking at some of the polling going into Super Tuesday, especially in the South, it was looking like Bloomberg could potentially give Biden a run for his money. But, of course, that didn't end up being the case. And Biden's campaign was really hoping for that Southern sweep, even though Sanders was polling really well in Texas. But he ended up being able to do that. And members of Congress who I spoke to who have been supporters of Biden really from the get-go were saying that they weren't surprised really by the Southern sweep, but what they were more surprised about was places like Massachusetts and Minnesota. They could, of course, credit Minnesota to that late endorsement from Klobuchar, but yeah, even Massachusetts took them by surprise with Warren coming in third in her home state. Those members of Congress who have been supporting Sanders really from the get-go are saying, you know, Biden had a great night, but let's not, you know, let's not forget about everything that Sanders has done up until this point, and let's also look ahead toward this kind of mini Super Tuesday on March 10th.
Yeah, kind of the Super Tuesday 2.0 here. Michigan offers sort of the third biggest prize for Democrats now, or at least the biggest prize coming up here for this next round here. Idaho, Mississippi, Missouri, Washington State, North Dakota also in play here. It's a very different dynamic than what we saw Super Tuesday. How have you sort of seen things shake up here so far?
I think what's been interesting, just really kind of comparing the race this time around to 2016, since Sanders was in both, is seeing how Biden can capture some votes that Clinton wasn't able to. A lot of people here on the Hill have been pointing to how he's been able to do better among the working class, and that's why we really saw him pick up more support too on Super Tuesday. So it'll be interesting to see how these different demographics in this Super Tuesday 2.0 play for Sanders, who has been spending a lot of time campaigning in these states as well.
From the talks that you've had up there with some pundits here, what are we thinking here about picking from these two here, the electability? Because, I mean, obviously, Bernie is a little different cup of tea for a lot of people. Joe Biden tends to be more a part of the establishment. Is there any sort of rumblings on, you know, that being a factor in who potentially gets the nomination?
Most definitely. I think that's what it really comes down to. But where people are still split, even on the Hill here and in Washington, is just who is more likely to do that, who is more likely to beat President Trump. Of course, those from Sanders' side are saying we need somebody like Sanders to really be a part of this. You know, they keep using the term revolution, to be this essentially completely day and night candidate from President Trump, whereas the other side, who has been more favorable of Biden, have been talking about, you know, instead of a revolution, let's move forward with kind of this Washington establishment, even though they don't like that term very much, to say, you know, here we have Biden who can really get something done. He's proven that as vice president. Let's give him this chance as president. And they think he can be the one to oust President Trump.
It'll be interesting to see the sort of the next mini Super Tuesday going forward here. Let's switch gears here, get into the coronavirus. Obviously, it's a big-time topic up there. In fact, President Trump just releasing $8 billion in those efforts. What else is actually going on up there, and is there really genuine concern for what coronavirus is doing?
I think there is genuine concern, but of course there's been a lot of politics at play as well, and you saw that really from the get-go when we started talking about this funding. The Trump administration at first came out with an amount much lower than $8 billion, and Democrats went on the attack almost immediately, saying that it wouldn't have that much of an effect. And so, yeah, at the end of this past week, the president did sign into law that $8 billion of funding that will go to prevention efforts and trying to develop a vaccine quickly, fast-pace that, and right now, too, a lot of that money will go toward these states that have been hit the hardest. I know congressmen and women in Washington are particularly concerned about what's happening there, and so this will go toward prevention efforts there, especially when it comes to testing and sanitizing efforts. The vice president, who's been leading the charge, was saying this past week that a lot more people need to be tested, but they just haven't had the funding available to make that happen. And so that's why we could see more and more cases too, because more and more testing is going to be able to get done. And so there is concern, but just talking to members of Congress on the Hill, they don't want there to be this widespread panic. They just want people to know that they are working to get this done, so in kind of preparations for what could be a pandemic.
Absolutely. Here. Also, another thing that I know you were sitting in on is Louisiana State Senator Katrina Jackson sponsoring a controversial abortion law in Louisiana. It's obviously made it all the way up to the Supreme Court. This law actually requires doctors who perform abortions to have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals. I guess what's sort of the hang-up here, and what are both sides kind of arguing in this case?
Yeah, so this was a really interesting case to sit in on for the oral arguments, because this was the first time that a major abortion case went before the Supreme Court now that two of President Trump's appointees are on the bench, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. And so supporters of this legislation, like Senator Jackson herself, have been saying that, you know, these admitting privileges protect the health and safety of women who want to have abortions. If they do have complications, they should be able to get help. Whereas the other side is saying this is not about women's health and safety. This is about closing abortion clinics and restricting access to abortion. They're saying that complications don't happen that often, and if they do, they happen once the woman is already at home. And so very interesting debate there to be had. And what we were hearing from the justices, just in from their questions, it was only about an hour of oral arguments, but there was something kind of interesting that Chief Justice Roberts suggested to. There was a similar case that went before the court back in 2016, a Texas law, and that was ultimately struck down. And he was actually on that dissenting opinion. But he kind of suggested that he could maybe be siding with the liberal side of the bench this time around just because of the standing of the 2016 ruling. And so that should be, the decision should ultimately be coming down by late June, and it'll be really interesting to see what side Roberts ends up falling on.
It's definitely going to be interesting to watch here. Also, too, about 20 state attorneys general were up there. In fact, Arkansas's own Leslie Rutledge was up there as well. Did you caught up with her? What was her vibe on this?
Yeah, so she led the push among the 20 state attorneys general in support of the Louisiana law, and she was really arguing it from the health and safety of women. She was saying, you know, that women should be able to, you know, have these admitting privileges at hospitals, saying that, you know, complications do happen. One of the justices that was really harping on the 30-mile radius of this requirement was Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And she was saying, you know, why does there need to be this 30-mile radius from the, you know, the clinic to the hospital? It should be from the woman's home to the hospital, if anything. And so, yeah, there will always be this debate about whether, you know, abortion should stay as a procedure or if it should end. But people on both sides were at least saying on the Supreme Court steps this week that it wasn't about that. It was just about these admitting privileges. But, of course, you have people pointing to this, too, saying that depending which way SCOTUS does end up deciding, that it could be the decision that really starts the momentum to overturn Roe v. Wade.
All right, never a dull moment up there in D.C. Jessie Turnure, we appreciate the time.
I appreciate you having me back.
Absolutely, anytime. All right, well, coming up after a quick break, we break down Governor Hutchinson's almost $6 billion budget. You're watching Capitol View on Sunday morning.
America has spoken. We don't have enough words of praise for Zoe's extraordinary playlist. Tonight, discover the show that's like nothing else on TV.
How do you do that?
Do what?
Really see me.
Zoe's extraordinary playlist, tonight on NBC.
I'm not pregnant. He will kill me when he finds out.
He's wrecking our lives. I need to kill him, man.
We go to Canada and get a baby. Cash exchange rate right now.
I want to buy a baby.
Good Girls, tonight on NBC.
Go to that.
I don't remember how it started. Our back and forth. Victory. Fumble. Repeat. It always came back.
Okay, here we go, throw it.
Yeah.
You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
Nice.
Hi, I'm Dr. Shelley Flace with today's tip for kids from the American Academy of Pediatrics. The nicotine in e-cigarettes is addictive and can harm brain development. That's why I worry about teens who try e-cigarettes. Many young people use pod-based e-cigarettes like Juul, which have high levels of nicotine. And because teens' brains are still developing, they can quickly become addicted. The tobacco industry uses fruit and candy flavors to attract young people, often turning them into lifelong users. For more, visit healthychildren.org.
You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
And welcome back into Capitol View. The state of Arkansas is gearing up for the fiscal session that begins on April 8th. On Wednesday, Governor Asa Hutchinson presented his budget to lawmakers. The nearly $6 billion proposal sees a 1.5% spending increase over last fiscal year's budget. That's the smallest year-to-year increase since the Great Recession. Increases in Department of Corrections spending hopes to curb jail overcrowding, and Medicaid spending increased by $65 million, which comes in slightly below the national average increase.
Also, instead of spending every dollar that comes in from the taxpayer, my budget instead leaves a $54 million surplus.
Governor Hutchinson says during the fiscal session, the state needs to work on how to allocate that surplus, addressing things such as rural broadband, workforce training, and how much to add to the long-term savings fund. And we bring in Dr. Jeremy Horpedahl. I said that right?
Perfect.
All right,
yeah.
Nailed it. There we go. That's half the battle here. UCA Assistant Professor of Economics and Arkansas Center for Research and Economics Scholar. Let's get into this here. The long-term fund is something that you guys have kind of written about here recently. You guys had an op-ed in the Democrat Gazette, and you also have a blog post out there about it. I guess, what's your guys' biggest issue with the long-term savings fund?
Well, I think first I would say that this is something that's fairly new in Arkansas. Before 2016, we didn't even have this fund. So I think the governor and recent legislatures have done a good job of getting this set up and making sure it's funded. I think what we would like to see changed is that not only should the balance be bigger, which the governor is looking at putting more money in, but having some rules about when money gets deposited,
sure, as
opposed to it being up to the discretion of the legislature and the governor. Most states that have these funds have had them for longer than Arkansas, and they've set up rules such as, when there's a budget surplus, that half of it will go into the fund.
Yeah.
So some sort of rule that will, while I think the current administration has done a good job of putting money in there, another thing they can do is to ensure that future administrations will do that, is to have some rules and to put those into law or into the Constitution, which of course will be up to the voters.
Sure.
But to do that so that in the future we're continuing to put money into this fund. And the main reason to have this fund is, if you have another recession, which there will be someday, that you don't have to cut the budget, that this money would be used to support the budget so you don't have to cut services,
sure,
when you do have a recession, as tax revenue goes down in a recession as well.
Now, from what you guys have seen, because I know you guys did some pretty extensive research kind of flipping through this post you guys have here, what have you seen other states do? And obviously, again, they're a lot ahead of the game to what Arkansas is, but what do you see were some of the norms that they were practicing?
So most states have rules about both deposits and withdrawals. So when are you required to deposit money, such as when there's a budget surplus, but also when can you withdraw money? What are the rules under which you're able to withdraw it? So most states would have some sort of rule that would say that the economy or the state budget has to be shrinking in order to take money out. With our fund in Arkansas, the rule now is that if the growth of the state budget is less than 3%, then they're allowed to pull money out. They don't have to, and they never have pulled out of money since this fund has been established. But that's not a very tight rule, because many years the state budget only grows by 3%, and so or general revenue does. So this would be a way to put in some harder rule, either less than that, or actually some states say only if the economy or the state budget is shrinking can you actually pull money out of these funds. So it's truly an emergency.
All right, a couple things that the governor did kind of have his own response to this. Throw it up there for me, guys. He said, Dr. Mitchell's column mischaracterized the state's current financial situation and ignored the substantial reserves Arkansas has built up over time. So that's that 4 years you were talking about. And when I took office, the long-term reserve fund was empty. Today it has a balance of approximately $152.5 million, obviously expected to grow larger. I guess, what would you like to see the state do more of when it comes to allowing that to grow larger?
I think, like I said earlier, that we want to have some rules as to how much money can go in there. We want to have a target of how much it should be. The governor yesterday, or this week when he came out with his budget, he said we want to be bigger, we don't know what the number should be. I think that's an excellent thing to have a big conversation like they did with taxes last time to study this and say, what should that number be? I think one of the legislators said, oh, why not $1 billion? Well, that's probably too much to set aside that we're not using for other things or giving back to taxpayers. So, between $150 million where it is now and $1 billion, what should we hit? And I think that's a good thing that we should study and look at. And I think if we compare to other states, Arkansas is, compared to the size of our budget, we have less than half in that fund compared to what other states have. So, getting it up to be bigger, but what's the right amount for us? That's something that I think, over the coming year, and maybe even in the session coming up, could be discussed in detail about what should we try to get to. And of course, you can't get there in 1 year. Right. But how much money ultimately do we think is a good idea to have in this fund?
Now, is there kind of a specific method that you think that should it be a certain percentage just of general revenue, period? Should it be more surplus? I mean, just in your opinion, what do you think that sort of that magic number is year to year ought to be?
I think what you can look to is past recessions and how much the budget shrunk. So we can look at the last couple of recessions. Of course, the last one was a really bad one. But if you look at the past couple, say what's kind of a normal shrinking of the budget and how much money would we need to cover that so we don't have to cut state services in a recession. I think that's where you can kind of get a general number to put in there. You might want to have more than that, though, because sometimes recessions come. We haven't had one in a while, but in the early 80s, you had kind of 2 back-to-back recessions. So you want to have, you don't want it to be all exhausted just from one recession. But I think that's a good target, is to look at, how much has our budget shrunk? Because every state's budget is different. They fluctuate differently. So we can look at our own history to see what would be a good number for us.
All right, so there you have it. Some good number stuff right there. Dr. Jeremy Horpedahl.
Thanks a lot,
We appreciate it. Mustache game on point. So you're welcome back here anytime.
Appreciate it.
For sure, absolutely. When we come back, we take a look at some of your top political stories. You're watching Capitol View on Sunday morning.
Barbecue and beer. Sounds good, right? No, seriously, look at this. Dickey's Barbecue Pit, Texas-style barbecue. You can taste it already. Now come get it for real. Dickey's Barbecue on Rodney Parham in Little Rock.
For 60 years, my family has been practicing family dentistry in North Little Rock, and now in our beautiful new location for many years to come. And we've added to our family, so come see Dr. Kyle Meek. Family dentistry at its finest. Dean Dental Solutions, North Little Rock.
As a waitress, you're running all over the place. Well, if you have a 4 or 6 hour shift and you're in pain the whole time, that seems like an eternity. I was just aching. My feet were throbbing. I was just genuinely hurting. I kind of lost hope. And then I saw the Good Feet store and I decided to stop in. When I went in there, that's when everything changed. My name is Kristen, and that's my Good Feet story.
See for yourself with a free personalized arch support fitting at the Good Feet store.
Come join our team. Apply today at Twin City Transportation. We need experienced long-haul regional and OTR dry van drivers. Give us a call or check us out at tctrans.com. Come be part of our family. Twin City Transportation. We know you by your name, not just your truck number.
Success Vision has incredible prices.
I got 2 pairs of glasses in about an hour for only $39.
I got
eye exam next door.
Success Vision has over 1,000 frames to choose from.
It's a one-stop shop for buying glasses.
12 years, and the service keeps getting better. It's a 10 out of 10.
This is my 5th year with Success Vision, and I'm happier than ever.
You better for 39 in an hour for less. Come see us today, Success Vision Express.
Slow smoked, mouth-watering Texas-style barbecue. Hours on a smoker, minutes to your plate. Dickey's Barbecue Pit, catering done right when all you want to do is watch the game. Dickey's Barbecue Pit on Rodney Ferrum in Little Rock.
You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
And welcome back into Capitol View. The Trump administration wants to bring troops home from Afghanistan immediately. But the peace plan signed over the weekend with the Taliban appears to be already in trouble. As Washington correspondent Kelly Meyer finds, the White House isn't breaking their promise.
President Trump is committed to bringing our troops home, and we are delivering on that here at the State Department.
State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus says despite a shaky start to the Afghan peace plan, the administration still believes thousands of U.S. troops should be coming home in the next few months.
The best chance for peace in a generation.
But Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says after 18 years of war,
we know that the road ahead will be difficult.
And it has been difficult with the ink on the U.S.-Taliban peace agreement still drying. The U.S. carried out an airstrike against the Taliban after the Taliban attacked Afghan forces.
In the first 135 days of the deal, the U.S. plans to reduce its forces from 13,000 to 8,600. On Saturday, the president told me he wants troops home ASAP.
How soon do you expect troops to be coming back?
Today. Okay? Today, they'll start immediately.
For the military's families, we need to bring them home.
Virginia Senator Mark Warner supports the peace plan, but worries the president might be moving too fast.
There is a way to get out of these conflicts that can do the most to both promote the stability for the Afghan people and not put that country back under control of the Taliban.
Pompeo is calling on both sides, the Taliban and the Afghan government, to live up to the new agreement and work for peace. Reporting in Washington, I'm Kelly Meyer.
The president flew over tornado damage in Tennessee on Friday. He was greeted by the Tennessee governor and First Lady Lee, as well as Nashville Mayor John Cooper. So far, a total of 6 tornadoes have been confirmed on a 158-mile path of destruction. Twisters killed dozens, with a high number of deaths from the Putnam County area. Hundreds of homes and businesses were demolished as part of those storms. The federal government reports that the U.S. economy added 273,000 jobs in February. That's far more than economists had predicted. Leading the gains were new jobs in health care and social assistance, food services, and the government. Meanwhile, the unemployment rate fell back to the historic low of 3.5%. The job survey was taken in the middle of February, before the coronavirus concerns shook corporate America. Many expect the March report will reflect the damage that the virus has done on business activity. International trafficking of people, animals, drugs, and weapons is sadly a booming business. Law enforcement officials estimate it brings in trillions of dollars a year to the criminal enterprises behind it. The House Financial Services Committee is working on a plan to combat trafficking by exposing the ways criminals exploit financial systems to make and manage their money. Jessie Turnure reports.
If they're going to make money off of it, they'll do it.
Experts in international trafficking say the illegal activity rakes in $2 trillion each year for criminal enterprises and puts public safety at risk.
Unfortunately, we might have an event that will absolutely show and prove to us that it's a major national and international security threat.
It doesn't make me feel real good.
Missouri Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver and his colleagues are trying to cut off the money that makes the trafficking of people, animals, drugs, and weapons possible.
Global terrorism has merged with organized crime to create financing workarounds.
Arkansas Congressman French Hill wants to see more collaboration between the financial and law enforcement sectors to better identify and stop these illegal transactions. From the law enforcement side, Gretchen Peters with the Center on Illicit Network and Organized Crime says says authorities need to focus on the methods, not just what's being smuggled.
What we should be focusing on is disrupting the corrupt systems and pathways that allow smuggling to occur.
And from the financial side, Angel Gwen Swift with Stand Together Against Trafficking says the industry needs to be more sophisticated.
They can see the data, but they need to know what the data is telling them.
Committee members say they'll keep working to find the right legislative solution.
We have done a lot of legislative nipping at the fringes on this problem. It is now for us to strike at its core.
In Washington, I'm Jessie Turnure.
Thank you, Jesse. The Justice Department announced a new initiative it hopes will get tech companies to do more to fight against online child sex abuse. A bipartisan group of lawmakers introduced a new bill, called it the Earn It Act, aimed at ensuring tech companies actually do just that. Under the current law, online platforms face limited legal responsibility for child pornography posted on their websites. The bill would require tech companies to earn that protection instead, and calls for establishing a commission to measure whether the tech companies are actually meeting goals. On Thursday, the Justice Department also announced new guidelines.
A set of voluntary principles to ensure online platforms and services have the systems they need to combat online sexual exploitation of children.
The guidelines encourage tech companies to monitor live streams and prevent searches for child pornography. The bill faces opposition from some in the tech industry and Senator Ron Wyden, who says the Earn It Act will give the Trump administration control on online speech. And we are back to wrap it up after this. You're watching Capitol View on Sunday morning.
Auto Credit Express doubles your down payment. Your money counts double. 500 down equals 1,000 down. 1,000 becomes 2,000 down. Guaranteed financing in Arkansas's best selection of pre-owned vehicles. Your money counts double at Auto Credit Express, North Little Rock and Pine Bluff, and online at expresscarloans.com.
My name is Paula Steinzig. My husband was Frank Steinzig, and he was murdered on February the 11th, 2015. He went to sell a motorcycle off of Craigslist and was shot and killed. The person left him there in the parking lot to die. Help Arkansas declare victory over violence.
Auto Credit Express doubles your down payment. Your money counts double. 500 down equals 1,000 down. 1,000 becomes 2,000 down. Guaranteed financing in Arkansas's best selection of pre-owned vehicles. Your money counts double at Auto Credit Express, North Little Rock and Pine Bluff, and online at expresscarloans.com.
You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
That is it for today's show. Don't forget you can take us on the go with wherever you get your podcast. Download the Capitol View podcast wherever you get them. We're back with an all-new Capitol View next week. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.